A little over a year ago, two friends and coworkers, Gabriel Vaughn and Robby Dobos, hiked just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. The two young men shined their flashlights into an active train tunnel, and, within only a few feet of safety from oncoming trains, they departed into the unlit tunnel. Eventually, they found their destination, a once sealed crack that had been unearthed, revealing Lookout Mountain Cave, a cave that's been off limits for decades. The pair eagerly climbed deeper into the darkness. That night, they didn't return home. Did they make it out alive? And why was this cave forbidden? Caving has become popular in the Chattanooga area thanks to internet videos and sites dedicated to exploring the Tennessee wilderness. 21-year-old Gabriel Vaughn and 23-year-old Robby Dobos were inspired to make their own adventure in the Lookout Mountain's lower cave, otherwise known as the Lookout Mountain Caverns. After getting off work on February 28, 2022, they drove to the edge of town and walked up a mountain path covered in dead leaves as the sun began to set in the distance. Living in Chattanooga, the pair grew up hearing tales of Lookout Mountain. Travelers from all over visit the spot just to travel along the quaint incline railway. Others walk along the side of the cliff, under rocky overhangs and over suspended bridges to witness a 90-foot man-made waterfall on the Georgia side of the mountain, and a spectacular view that stretches across 7 different states. But these men weren't here to enjoy a scenic nature hike, and they weren't going to pick up souvenirs from the tourist attraction. They were traveling under the veil of night to reach a hidden spot that was the stuff of local legends. Robby and Gabriel wanted to peel back the carefully constructed stage to explore the real history that was sealed away long ago. Unofficial reports by rogue cavers claim the cave beneath Lookout Mountain reaches over 12 miles into the ground. Beyond a sealed entrance, the cave provides a treasure trove of possibilities. The two men could unearth new discoveries, artifacts, and history during their trip below ground. As they ducked behind trees to avoid being spotted by oncoming trains, these two amateur cavers were walking along a route soaked in the blood of multiple battles that ravaged the countryside years ago. They likely reminisced about these legends as they stepped off the beaten path and walked along a railroad. Along the bend, they reached the entrance of an old railroad tunnel that was built over 100 years ago. Countless people have seen the tunnel overlooking Moccasin Bend as they drove along the interstate highway, many of them totally oblivious to the secrets this tunnel holds. Robby and Gabriel sneaked in the shadows. Around a quarter mile into the tunnel, they found an autograph signed by Andrew Jackson dated 1837. Some debate the signature's authenticity, but it could have been from the former president, since the date matches the time when Andrew Jackson left the White House and returned to his birth state of Tennessee. It's both fascinating and grim, since Jackson ordered the removal of Native American tribes, like the Cherokees, from the Chattanooga area. They moved past the famous signature until they reached a spot deep within the concrete tube where the smooth walls of the tunnel changed into a pile of rubble, marking the entrance of a cave that was blasted shut. However, the railroad company had no idea that cavers were secretly chipping away at the entrance for decades, and now Robby and Gabriel just had to squeeze through the narrow entrance to reach a cave that crawled into the dark depths of the notorious mountain. The two cavers were dressed in warm outerwear, but nothing that was rated to protect against the harsh environment of the cave. But since they were new to caving, they didn't expect to run into anything too dangerous. After crawling through the boulders and narrow passages that sealed the upper entrance, they trekked through strangely blackened rock with complex structures along the layered flow lines. In these upper portions, the cave didn't look like a normal, wild cave. There were signs of use, and even recent use. The pair carefully navigated the winding serpentine trail as they pressed their faces against muddied stone to squeeze through tight portions. In some portions, the black surface of the rock rubbed off onto their skin, but they hardly noticed as they pushed forward to a rocky, throne-like structure called Devil's Seat. The cave had multiple layers, and they wanted to reach the end of the surveyed portion. To do that, They had to climb down multiple sections as water sprayed from above. Since the cave was off limits even to official cavers, there were almost no safety features in place. No guiding arrows, no signs, no anchors for ropes, and no permanently affixed ropes to help them climb. As they descended, they may have found signs of use. Little areas carved into the limestone, and dripstone pools excavated and turned into tubs. They found evidence of pickaxes scraping the stone and leaving huge gashes in their wake. And they may have even found artifacts from days long ago. For Robby and Gabriel, this is what it was all about, the thrill of an adventure. This journey was taking longer than they expected, but they were undeterred as they searched for more evidence of the cave's long and dark history. Robby and Gabriel also rediscovered 13 old boxes carved from stone. These were presumed to be ballot boxes for voting, but there's no surviving records indicating what they were used for or who put them there. Records have shown that Lookout Mountain Cave was used by secret societies like the Freemasons and some criminal societies. All sorts of conspiracy theories have swirled around the existence of these stone boxes. Even the number of boxes freaks people out, especially those who suffer from triskaidekaphobia, or fear of the number 13. Long ago, the cave was used as a campsite by Native Americans. In the Civil War, parts of Lookout Mountain Cave were used as a hospital, sheltering soldiers from the cannon fire and lead mini balls that tore through bone and lodged in soft organs, unable to pass through the body flying at low velocity. Robby and Gabriel weren't letting their imaginations run wild. The cave was also mined for saltpeter to make the gunpowder that fueled these wars. They didn't know it, but the same stories that lured them to Lookout Mountain caverns could also create many more death traps than even a normal cave would have. The bacteria and viruses present in the blood of soldiers could still be alive in dormant states, tainting the water forever, and the chemicals unearthed from the mine could still linger deep within. Mines that were blasted shut have poor airflow, which easily allows foul air to build up, suffocating or poisoning oblivious cavers, like these two. The pair sidestepped the elevator shaft and kept exploring past formations like the Mystic Cove and the Oriental Palace, until they were over a mile into the cave. Eventually, they reached a deep hole that looked endless from above, if not for the signs of a ruined stairway and metal machinery lying around. This pit is a 400-foot deep hole that was excavated in 1928 to create a mining elevator. 260 feet down, the shaft opens to a side entrance that stretches another 100 feet before turning into a waterfall. This waterfall and the cave network below it became known as Ruby Falls, which is still open as a tourist attraction. With gaudy labels on its formations like the Onyx Jungle and the Cactus and Candle, that part of the cave wasn't interesting to the two cavers. But even if they wanted to view Ruby Falls from atop the waterfall, they would surely die trying to reach the entrance, since the elevator and the emergency exit stairs were crumbled in disrepair after the elevator mining and tours were closed, as soot from train exhaust filled the cave, creating foul air and fire hazards. The cavers reached Solomon's Temple, a formation named after the biblical figure who hired stonemasons to build his temple atop the most holy site in Jerusalem. The cavers might not have known the connection between this formation and the secret societies that once inhabited the cave. But as they pushed onward through the dismal reaches of the cave, they found another feature that they immediately recognized: an 80-foot vertical drop. Unlike the mine shaft, there was no way to get around this one. They had to slowly and carefully climb down without safety features to protect them. With regular shoes, no helmets, and no other safety gear, the pair carefully climbed down one step at a time. Luckily, in this section, the stone was easy to grip. They were both tense, and their muscles were starting to fatigue, but they made it to the bottom without injury. Nearly 2 miles into the cave, Gabriel and Robby could have found animal bones, as skeletons have been found in the cave over the decades. They were near the official end of the cave, the point where their real journey was set to begin. Everything else were just tests. At a little over 2 miles into Lookout Mountain Cave, they reached a gate. This gate is supposed to mark the end of the cave, but the gate isn't truly the end to Lookout Mountain Cave. Beyond the bars, there was a small hole where the cave stretched onward into the darkness of the unknown. The pair was excited. Without debate, they bypassed the barrier and crawled ahead. Robby and Gabriel had now reached an unmapped section of the cave. Legends say that soldiers entered Lookout Mountain Cave and exited near Nakalula Falls in Alabama. That would make the cave not 2 miles long, but an incredible 82 miles long. So far, no connection that long has ever been discovered, but that mystery drew Robby and Gabriel to the cave. They lived for this moment. However, instead of securing a permit to survey the cave, these men entered private land without any formal training to keep them safe. The area beyond the gate was a small hole near the floor of the cave. It would be a tight squeeze, but they had to see where it went. The whole passage was a muddy, tight crawl with very little air. It seemed to go on forever. Water trickled through the tunnel, which nearly filled the small space. The men felt like they were drowning as they turned their heads just to breathe, all while sharp rocks jabbed into their torsos, making each breath painful. They crawled and crawled until their fatigue began to take hold. With no end in sight, they felt like they could die, just like the tragic Nutty Putty incident. Trying to crawl backward through this claustrophobic tube would also be a nightmare, so they paused when they needed to, but they couldn't rest for long. If the tunnel suddenly ended, they could be sucking all the air out of the tube. Somehow, Gabriel and Robby reached the end of the tunnel, but their troubles were only just beginning. This passage ended up being 600 feet long. The water they were exposed to during the long ordeal was only 40 degrees. In those temperatures, they would lose consciousness or die in roughly 1 to 3 hours of constant exposure. They got through to a section that wasn't as wet, but they were totally exhausted. They tried to explore further, but the twisting and winding levels of the cave made them lose their way. They were lost in the labyrinth, and the cold made it even harder to think. Disoriented and fearing for their lives, they sheltered in place. Robby and Gabriel were trapped in the Lookout Mountain caverns. Luckily, although the cavers ignored red flags and ignored safety precautions, they did tell family that they were going exploring on Lookout Mountain. The dead of night loomed over Chattanooga as parents and other family members shared worried conversations. Fellow co-workers and friends of Robby and Gabriel also began texting one another, concerned that they hadn't heard from them all night. Sleepless and panicking, their families reported them missing. The missing persons call could have stifled the rescue mission, a situation that has happened in the past as law enforcement agencies vie for control of the situation. An overdue call would have given rescuers a better chance to find them, since they could concentrate their efforts on searching in the cave. But since they were reported missing, the rescue team had to account for foul play, or incidents outside of the cave. The Chattanooga Fire Department was the first agency to join the rescue. Their search began at 6 p.m. the following day, after teams gathered at a nearby Walgreens parking lot. From the parking lot, they could look to the base of Lookout Mountain on the banks of the Tennessee River, and spotters could look for any movement in the hibernating forest of the mountain. This would be challenging, though, since the men were wearing dark, natural colors to blend in with the woods so they could avoid detection during their entry. As teams began searching through the woods, calling the names of Gabriel and Robby, other rescue teams arrived to lend their aid. The Hamilton County Cave and Cliff team would spearhead the mission to explore the caverns, while other teams would continue checking the forest. They had no idea what to expect. Trains go through the tunnel all day, causing loud rumbles that echo through the rock. The two men could have been trapped in a cave-in, or they could have ran into foul air and died. An approaching train from the Norfolk Southern Rail Company saw the first rescue crews as they were hauling their gear up the side of the mountain. Technicians on board the train hit the brakes, stalling their own train to see what was happening. Once they learned of the missing cavers, the train staff sent maintenance workers to aid in the rescue. The team now had access to high-rail trucks, specialized dual-mode vehicles that could drive on highways and on railroad tracks. Using these vehicles, the train workers brought rescuers to the site and back down from the rescue site to save time and energy. The rescuers reached the cave entrance, but it was too small to safely pass through. The rescue team had to bring huge packs of gear that contained all the necessary tools: first aid gear, stretchers, splints, food, and blankets. With all their gear, there was no way the team was going to fit through the tight crawl beyond the breakdown. Luckily, the maintenance workers from Norfolk Southern had it covered. The same trucks also helped carry heavy equipment to drill through the cement and widen the entrance to the cave. Groups of rescuers slowly drove through the tunnel that was covered in discolored rock with water streaking down overhead. It was an eerie sight with some garbage littered nearby and no lights other than the headlights of the truck. They felt like they were in a cave before they actually entered the real cave. Below, the commander of the operation, clad in a high-visibility vest, authorized the team to open the hole to the cave while coordinating with other members of the team. Meanwhile, the families of Gabriel and Robby arrived at the scene, and some of their friends joined to show their support. As they worked to break open the entrance, the train continued to block the railroad, which allowed the rescue crew to safely work on the mission. However, train traffic was backed up all the way to Chicago. Inside the cave, Robby and Gabriel were deeply afraid. They knew they were lost, and time was running out, and soon they would succumb to the elements. They got close to combine their body heat, and they tried to stay warm as their soaked clothing sent shivers down their spines. The wheels on the high-rail truck squeaked to a halt as another crew stopped at the entrance. With the hole finally opened, the first teams pushed their way into the cave. The new crew was a group of CSX railway workers who were tasked with patrolling the railroad to search for any signs of the men or any suspicious activity. The rescue crew was immediately covered in mud as they pressed through the soot-covered rock of the cave carrying their heavy backpacks. They searched the upper passage, then the second upper passage. Still nothing. The first team came back, and a second was sent inside. Then a third joined them to scour the cave in search of the lost men. Nearly a full day of rescue work passed by. Teams journeyed to a lower passage that led to a 60-foot drop. They were tense as they rappelled down. The bodies of the missing men could be just out of sight in the shadows. When they reached the bottom, they found the lower portion had some wooden steps and light bulbs along the passages from days long gone. Rescue crews also found other dates and names carved in the lower 400-foot portion of the cave, but there was no sign of Robby or Gabriel. Their families began to fear the worst. Their hopes of a good outcome drained. They were scared, and inside the cave, the missing men started to lose color as sleep and fatigue threatened to take them from this world. A team from the Hamilton County Cave and Cliff Rescue Squad came equipped with wetsuits to tackle the waterlogged portions of the cave. These devices provide strong insulation to keep the body warm even when wet. They're not as strong as dry suits, which prevent water from even contacting the skin, but dry suits are clunky and hard to maneuver, and they're usually reserved for deep sea diving or Arctic diving when the water is impossibly cold. The team found the gate and performed the same dangerous crawl that the men had made. Even the pros struggled through the constricted, partially flooded crawls with almost no room to breathe. Their hands pushed through the mud as they gasped in whatever little air pockets they could find. Hoping to find the men alive and well, the team pushed through the tunnel, but there was no sign of them. Rescuers ventured a little deeper, before they finally made contact with Gabriel and Robby. They were alive, for now. They were both in the deepest known part of the cave, so it would take time for additional crews to bring food and water into the cave to replenish their strength. The first crew made contact on Wednesday at almost 4 a.m. The rescue teams had been working around the clock for over a day. Their families were hopeful, but they still had to make it out of the cave. If the men couldn't move, the crews would have to widen the whole tunnel, which could take hours. In that time, there's no telling if the men's conditions would remain stable or if they'd crash. After another team arrived to bring supplies to rejuvenate the cavers, Gabriel and Robby felt strong enough to crawl through the hellish tunnel. Fueled by their will to survive, after 2 hours, they were able to exit Lookout Mountain Cave on their own, without stretchers or any additional help. The men emerged from the tunnel in the early hours of March 2nd. Down at the parking lot command center, family and friends were waiting for them. They ran up to hug them, despite being covered in mud. Their loved ones joked about them snuggling for warmth, and they posed for pictures. Medical staff examined them and advised them to stay in the hospital overnight just to be safe, but they had avoided hypothermia and seemed to be recovering, so they refused. In their search for the exit, Robby and Gabriel had ended up going 2 miles deeper into the cave. Now, while they were happy to be saved, they immediately faced trespassing charges. But Robby said he'd rather be in a cell than trapped in that cave for 1 more minute. The rescue crews and railroad units immediately began work to reseal the tunnel with more fortification than last time. Deputy Chief of the Hamilton County Rescue Service, Brad Tipton, photographed some of the strange historical sites of the cave during the rescue, and now that it's sealed, these may be the last photos of this strange Masonic ritual site that the world will ever have. Now that it's resealed, we may never know. Have any local legends inspired you to venture into the darkness in search of answers? Or what do you think that cave was really used for? Share your stories with us in the comments section. Hit that like button if you want to see more mysterious cave rescue stories, and subscribe to the channel to catch the next frightening video of life and death deep within the world's caves.